Hello and welcome to RT with me, Karen Tarachi. We go now to a developing story. Up to 4 explosions have rocked the central square of Syria's largest city of Aleppo, reportedly killing around 40 people. The blasts were thought to have been caused by car bombs and were followed by heavy gunfire. More on that from RT's Middle East correspondent Paula Sleer. Paula, she joins us live now. So Syria is no stranger to terrorist attacks. What happened this time?
Well, there have been, as you say, a number of explosions in the Syrian northern city of Aleppo, which is also the country's commercial hub. Syrian state television is reporting that this is the work of terrorists and that dozens of people have been killed, many of them belonging to the Syrian regime. Now, it comes amid intensified fighting between government forces and rebel fighters in the city. We are understanding that the explosions were a few minutes apart. They happened near the city's large squares. At least one massive crater has remained in the ground, and that the facades of several tall buildings nearby were completely ripped apart. According to eyewitnesses there, the explosions were followed immediately by intensified gun battles and clashes. We are also hearing that by all accounts, it seems as if the explosions were caused by car bombs. Now, this has not yet been verified, but it does suggest that this is the work of suicide bombers. There is a Lebanese newspaper that is reporting that the Syrian President Bashar Assad is in the city of Aleppo, where he is visiting and seeing firsthand what the battles there have been bringing about, and that he's also ordered at least some 30,000 troops to be deployed. It is unusual, it certainly is rare, that there have been suicide bombings in the city of Aleppo. There was a bombing back in February in which 28 people were killed, but mostly now the suicide bombings have been concentrated in the capital city of Damascus. And over the past few days, and certainly over the past few weeks, there has been an intensified number of car bombs exploding there. Now, the rebels have come forward and claimed responsibility for those car bombings. So far, no one has claimed responsibility for this particular attack, but it certainly does have all the fingerprints of rebel car bombing suicide attacks. There was a call last week by rebel fighters in which they said that they would intensify their fighting in Aleppo. They said that they were going to end the battle there. It comes amid reports that we're receiving that Qatar has sent nearly $200 million to the Free Syrian Army. So certainly the scene seems to have been set for fighting to intensify, certainly in the near future, and looking now in the city of Aleppo.
All right, that is Paula Sleer live from Tel Aviv. Thank you, Paula. Now, Khurram Iqbal, co-author of Pakistan Terrorism Ground Zero, draws parallels between the war in Afghanistan and the current situation in Syria.
I would like to mention here that what's happening in Syria these days, it reminds me of Afghanistan back in 1979, when the Western democracies supported an international jihad against the Soviet Union. Back then, the international community, the so-called Western capitals, they were able to kick out the Soviet Union, but the long-term consequences were really devastating for the regional and international peace. I'm afraid that if the Western capitals continue to support these rebel movements against the regimes, it will lead to the devastating consequences in the near and longer future.
The danger of terrorism spilling out of Syria was highlighted by the head of Russia's security service, the FSB. RT's Tom Barton has more on what he had to say.
The head of Russia's Federal Security Service, Alexander Bortnikov, was talking about his concerns not just about sectarian violence in the Middle East, not about the humanitarian crisis there, but about his fear of the risk of the rise of Islamist terror groups, specifically Al-Qaeda, in the region. He said that the removal of leaders there has created a situation which makes it easier for those groups to gain a foothold, and that the unrest in the region makes it a breeding ground for terrorism. More than just those links, there are specific fears about what Al-Qaeda and terrorist groups may be trying to do in the region. A, that they may be trying to gain higher positions within new government structures there, and B, that they may find it easier to try and get their hands on weapons of mass destruction, which would create a very dangerous situation indeed. Specific to Russia, he talked about the reported sightings of North Caucasus terrorists operating in the region and gaining valuable experience there. And he talked about a new strategy, that of 1,000 stabs being employed, lots of little attacks. The death of the US ambassador to Libya recently has now been linked to Al-Qaeda, and Mr. Bortnikov says that the EU wildfires that have caused such problems recently may have been started by terrorists, citing websites encouraging terrorists to try and cause as much damage as possible by doing things like lighting fires, which require very little input. Those were the messages from the FSB head about the danger of the growth of terrorism in the restive Middle East.
Also in the Middle East, there's fresh outrage over just how far Bahraini authorities are prepared to go to eradicate anti-regime protests. And in a few minutes here on RT, we talk about how the truth of the crackdown isn't only being ignored, but even buried by major global news networks.